ride.
Want a lift?
Hey! Okay, dude, let's see what that jalopy can do!
What's a jalopy?
First off the line.
Yeah, I'm sure they're feeling pretty silly right now.
Hey guys, Zack here, and welcome back to Megas Month. So today's episode we're going to actually be reviewing is Bugging the System, and Bugging the System is kind of interesting in that it kind of sets up the possibility of us finding out more about the Glorft, and it ultimately never follows through on that because well, it basically is just like, hey, you want to learn more about this alien race that's kind of our main antagonist? Nope. Yeah, it sets it up and then ultimately doesn't follow through as a joke, and I do kind of like that. But yeah, in case this episode opens up with Coop actually training in the asteroid belt just outside of Earth, and he's currently training in Megas. He's smashing up a bunch of asteroids, and he does remark that Kiva that he didn't realize that training could be so fun, and Kiva, of course, points out that it's not supposed to be fun, and that she's trying to hone his skills so that he can one day become the savior of humanity and save everybody from the Glorft, which, of course, Coop just kind of nonchalantly dismisses because obviously he's heard that same exact spiel from her hundreds of times before. He obviously does it. He obviously knows what his job is, and at that point, Kiva's just kind of droning on and on about the same things, which does kind of get a little bit boring after a while, but in case, she also points out that training in an asteroid field is actually for the safety of the people around him, because obviously Coop is very clumsy and likes to smack and accidentally smashes a lot of things, and of course this is the safest. An asteroid field is actually the safest place to train because, as Kiva points out, there's nothing particularly important out there for him to smash, so it'll probably be fine, but. Then Jamie points out that she probably shouldn't be too sure, and then points off to something off in the horizon. And what we find out is that it's actually a floating mine, which Coop initially mistakes for another asteroid, and he goes in to smash it. But Kiva eventually figures out what it is and persuades him not to. And sure enough, what we find out is that for some reason, just outside the asteroid belt or outside of Earth, there's for whatever reason, just a big floating minefield that's it's just there, and it's not fully explained where it came. It's not fully explained where it came from. It's just kind of there. But in case Kiva merely tells Coop to actually back away slowly and get them out of reverse, and Coop does. He does exactly what he's supposed to do. He puts Megas into reverse and slowly backs out of the minefield. But while he's backing out, he accidentally scrapes one. And with Megas' foot, and that just causes him to just start cascading into all the other ones, and eventually Coop realizes he's losing control because obviously he's being bounced around a minefield. Not good for Megas' overall stability and control. But he eventually spies something spies some sort of space station off in the distance, and realizes that he'll have to make a crash landing there because he's obviously lost control and doesn't know what he's doing, and of course, what we find out is that it's actually this giant ringworld type thing, kind of similar to the ones from Halo. Actually, it looks like this. It's this giant ring. It's this giant ring with a bunch of towers on it, and of course, Coop is forced to ultimately crash land on it, even though they openly admit they don't know what's there and even what exactly it is, but because Coop had no choice, he just kind of crash lands on there, and eventually he does manage to pick himself back up after landing, and Kiva's very curious about what exactly it is they landed on, since going through her database, she points out that she doesn't really understand what she's looking at, but Coop decides that the best way to actually figure it out is to get up and explore, and sure enough, he turns Megas' headlights on, which and he just turns the headlights on the car part of Megas, and also the floodlights that are on Megas' main body as well. I should mention it just has floodlights and headlights and other things, and Coop just starts poking around, looking at everything, and Kiva points out that after going through her data and research, she points out that she's not entirely sure what it is what they landed on. She just points out that whatever it is, it's very old and made by a very advanced race of people that don't seem to be around anymore. And Jamie even points that out. He points out that if it is indeed a highly advanced society, then that begs the question of where the hell did they all go? And And sure, Kiva does indeed point out that it is very strange since she points out that there doesn't seem to be any sort of life forms on the planet. But Coop eventually realizes that the best way to actually figure out how to bust it, how to actually get the information that they need is to start busting things open. But Kiva stops him before he could, pointing out that they don't fully understand what exactly it is they're looking at, and they don't even know what it is. So she points out that he could be damaging something important. So Coop just kind of points out that he never gets to smash anything anymore, and ultimately just kicks Megas' foot in disappointment, which winds up breaking the floor open, and he winds up falling in, and they actually wind up inside the ring world where they quickly find out what actually happened to the locals. As it turns out, Coop is actually found his way on the inside of the ring world, and they found out that the locals were a bunch of giant robots that unfortunately that seemed to be deactivated and also have been cocooned by something, and this causes Jamie to be nervous, pointing out that they don't really know what exactly it is that could be down here, but Kiva just points out that he's scared, which Jamie denies, and Coop kind of makes fun of him for. And so yeah, it's pretty funny. Kiva basically just claps back to Jamie, and Coop follows her lead. It's great. But in case after poking around a little bit, they eventually wonder if there's any sort of threats there, and wonder what exactly it was that actually did the giant robot people in. And sure enough, they actually find out what happened, because shortly after that, a giant worm-like thing actually winds up appearing and tries to attack Megas, which of course Coop deals with no problem. But then another one tries to pin Megas to a pillar, which he once again destroys. And in the process, he picks it up and throws it, and it winds up hitting a thing, which turns out to be power for the entire ring world. He winds up turning the ring world back on, and winds up turning on the power. And Kiva, quickly realizing that this may be their opportunity to figure out what exactly it is this thing is, decides that that's probably best for them to go topside, and Coop immediately does that. He immediately gets out of the hole he made and immediately flies back to the surface of the ring world, where Kiva once again does some analysis, and sure enough, what we find out is that the ring world is basically just a giant library. What we find out. What Kiva finds out is that it actually is a giant database, which and Coop and Jamie are initially hopeful that it has some sort of computer games on it, which of course it doesn't, and with much to their disappointment. But what they do find out, which is a bit cooler, is that the ring world has is this giant data archive that has lists of data for about hundreds of thousands of different species of aliens. Human, basically, namely the Glorft, which Kiva quickly finds out she could actually use the data to actually find out more about the Glorft, why they're attacking the Earth, and also figure out how to fix their time flux unit so they can actually get to the future and stop the Glorft. And of course, Jamie points out that that's actually pretty cool, and even admits that it's like a giant library, but with much more vicious bookworms, and he's not wrong about that. The ringworms have actually attacked Coop and them a couple of times, so they're obviously very aggressive. And Coop even admits that he's had a bit of a bad history with libraries and is worried he'll break something. And sure enough, what we find out is that one time when he was younger, he was actually trying to get to one of his favorite books, but it was on the top shelf. And the library he was in didn't have a stepladder, so he started climbing bookshelves to get to the one he wanted, and he wound up knocking them all over, and also narrowly avoided hitting Jamie, who just stood there and watched the whole thing. So, yeah, for that reason, Coop is very worried about the fact that he's going to destroy the library by accident. But then several of the ringworms actually appear and start trying to attack Megas, or seemingly, and Coop is about ready to actually fight them off, but then Kiva quickly finds out that the robots seem to not the robot worms seem to not really care about Megas at all, and sure enough, what we find out is that they actually move by sound, or rather they read energy, and their only reason they're attacking Megas is because it's currently emitting the most energy in the immediate surroundings. But now that the buildings are back on, they'll probably just leave them alone and do things with those. And when Jamie also questions the fact that she said there was no life on the planet, she does point out that there doesn't seem like they are indeed any sort of organic life form. She points out that they're probably a silicate-based life form, which is why her life readings weren't picking anything up. They literally are just they're basically made out of, what is it? They're made out of plastic, metal, and a whole bunch of other things. They're very much alive, but not in the sense that humans and people and aliens are. Basically, they're not alive in that. They're not alive in that sense. But then eventually they notice something is wrong with Megas and Coop quickly notices randomly that Megas is suddenly chugging a lot of power and is losing a lot of it and is very confused about what exactly is going on. So Kiva actually asked him to turn on the internal cameras inside of Megas, and what we find out is that one of the creatures is a juvenile form of one of the creatures has actually climbed inside of Megas and is monkeying around in there. And Coop immediately gets angry, pointing out that that those things have somehow gotten inside his robot, and he's not too happy about that. And Kiva ultimately volunteers to actually go down and fix it, but also points out that she needs backup. And after a very long pause where both Kiva and Coop stare at Jamie eventually realizes that they're actually talking about him, and he kind of calls a not it, but Coop points out that he kind of has no choice. It's obviously Kiva needs to go down there to fix the things, and Coop needs to actually keep an eye on Megas and make sure nothing goes wrong with it, and just sit there and pilot it. So that of course leaves Jamie, who's kind of like the middle of the road. He's not really useful for piloting Megas, but he is useful for kind of supporting backup. Actually, he's not really useful for that either. But I mean, it's Jamie. He's not the best person, but Jamie of course concludes that Coop really has no choice, and ultimately grabs a spare bat that apparently Coop just keeps in Megas for emergencies. That bat hasn't been there in a previous episode, I should mention. It's just sort of showed up as the episode needed it. But in any case, Jamie then grabs a bat, and Kiva actually climb into the hatch in the back of Megas to actually go inside, with Jamie just kind of bemoaning the fact that he's even there at all. He suggested they would just stay home and play video games, but of course nobody listened to him, so of course they're there. But in case as they're actually climbing inside of Megas, Kiva then tells Coop to use his head, not fight unless he absolutely has to, and generally just conserve his power until they can actually fix what's wrong with Megas. So Coop kind of points out that he can easily do that, but it quickly becomes apparent as he's just kind of sitting at the steering wheel staring at nothing that he's getting a little bit antsy, and he's kind of getting to the point where it's like, yeah, I kind of want to smash some stuff, but I know I can't. But yeah, in any case, Kiva and Jamie are actually climbing around there, and Jamie true to form, immediately tries to use Kiva as a human shield, pointing out that he'll take up the rear on the off chance something attacks them from the front. But then Kiva also points out the possibility that something could attack him from behind, and Jamie ultimately decides that going in front is actually better. But Kiva just kind of convinces him to go in front. So yeah, rather humorous. But in case while they're in there, they're actually walking around inside, trying to get to the core, or that where Megas is his main source of power is. And at one point, Coop actually has to fend off one of the creatures because he gets a little too close and tries to attack him. So he actually winds up grabbing it and going into what he calls a superplex, or at least I think that's what he calls it. But in any case, what this winds up doing is it actually winds up closing one of the passageways while Kiva and Jamie are in it, and of course Jamie then proceeds to yell at him, pointing out that they're in there, and Coop points out that of course he had to employ an emergency attack, and that it probably won't happen again while they're in there, but which does satisfy the two of them, and the two of them continue onward, where they eventually do find the little ringworm bug that's actually causing problems, and at which point Kiva helps herself to Jamie's bat and smashes it, and concluding that they've actually gotten it, she then calls up Coop to let him know the good news, only for Jamie to point out that there are actually a lot more of them in there, and And of course, this causes Kiva to quickly realizes that their job isn't done. So she just kind of goes on a big tirade where she just smashes up robots while Jamie just kind of watches the whole thing. In a combination of awe and abject terror, he just kind of sits there and watches her as she just destroys every single one of the ringworm bots. And to be fair, Kiva's kind of badass. I will mention that she's very cool. But yeah, Jamie doesn't really ultimately know how to respond, and but eventually Kiva does indeed deal with the rest of the robots, and they make their way to the core where they discover a much bigger one that's actually making more of them, and they quickly of course they quickly realize that must be the source of the power, and that's it must be some sort of queen that is currently trying to drain the energy from Megas to raise its babies, and lets Coop know this, pointing out that there is indeed something trying to eat his babies, and trying to eat his power and raise babies from it, and Coop does point out that they need to that they should deal with it quickly because that the power is still going down. So of course Kiva immediately goes in to actually go and fight it, while Coop continues to suppress his urges to actually go in and smash something, pointing out that he can't do that because he needs to conserve his power and could risk hurting the guys. So he just needs to just sit there and take it and wait for something to happen. So and of course Kiva immediately goes to confront the queen, but Jamie kind of starts attacking its baby spastically with the bat. He just kind of starts smashing them to pieces, and in the process, he accidentally hits Kiva in the head, which causes her to be knocked out. And of course, Jamie quickly realizes what he did, and quickly realizing that now that he's in trouble, he needs to get the queen away from Kiva as fast as possible. So he throws the bat at it and lowers it back to the hallway where that Coop closed earlier. And once he's back there, he tells Coop to pull off the superplex again, which Coop does, and it winds up destroying the queen. And once it's been destroyed, Jamie kind of sits there and mocks it a little bit, and then proceeds to actually point out that it wasn't so tough after all. But yeah, I think this is one of the few times Jamie has actually contributed. I mean, of course, that's Jamie's entire thing. He's normally just sits there, talks moral support, and points out when the threat is showing up, and occasionally spouts off combos and stuff for Coop to do, but for the most part, I think this is the only time where he's actually been in a fight and won. I think he actually came up with something clever to actually deal with a current threat. So yeah, I'm kind of proud of him. He doesn't really contribute much, so don't expect much of him for the rest of the series. But here, very much so. But in case with that dealt with, Jamie then goes to check up on Kiva, who doesn't fully understand what happened, pointing out that she was winning, and Jamie lies and tells her that she must have just let her guard down, but he points out that he dealt with it, and they return back to the car to actually get back to Megas' cockpit, and sure enough, with that now dealt with, Coop is very happy about the fact that they're back, and does point out that he's just been sitting there very, very patient and waiting for them to deal with it, and of course now they quickly realize that they actually need to start looking into some data to actually figure out what exactly is going on. So now that they can actually research some stuff, but then a very big robot that kind of looks like Moth a little bit, and Coop even remarks about that a little bit. But then in any case, the giant Moth robot just kind of bursts out of the ring world, and while initially very intimidating, Kiva then points out that it doesn't seem like it's actually paying attention to them, since obviously with the towers running, it can't actually see them. So of course Coop points out that that's probably fine, and in the process, he actually decides to chuck one of the ringworms that he was holding, because he actually had to hold on to one, but to actually keep the ringworms away from him. But in the process, he accidentally breaks one of the floors, and he actually breaks the floor and turns off the power, which of course means that the creatures are able to actually track him again. And of course this immediately causes the Moth robot to kind of focus on them and kind of corner them, and Kiva immediately tells Coop to get them out of there, pointing out, when Coop objects, pointing out that she's not going to get all of her information about the Glorft and all the other things she was hoping to get from the ring world. She merely points out that it wouldn't serve much use if they're dead. But and of course, Jamie also kind of mocks Coop a little bit, pointing out that he's probably going to smash it anyway, like he always does. But Coop is very much determined to not smash something and preserve it long enough, while also winning the fight against the Moth robot and keep everything intact. So he actually decides to actually go into one of his signature trash talks, where of course he points out that he insults its appearance, calling it a Moth wannabe freak, and points out that it got inside his giant robot, he's not going to let it deal with it. He's not going to let it defeat him, and ultimately and then proceeds to actually fly at it and tries to punch it, but the Moth robot just kind of swats him away comically, and it quickly becomes apparent that Coop is a little bit outclassed, and Coop eventually decides that he's going to try that again, so he gets back in the air and starts shooting missiles at it, which do hurt the Moth robot, but don't really take it down, and the Moth robot retaliates by actually shooting him with some webbing, which winds up incapacitating him in a giant cocoon, and Megas winds up going down on top of one of the data towers, and of course, Jamie and Coop both tell him to actually get out of there and get up, but quickly it becomes apparent that Coop isn't able to actually move it because he's been cocooned, and he's currently trying to figure out a way to actually get himself unstuck. And to make matters worse, all the ringworms are actually closing in on him, and eventually he does eventually find the controls he's looking for, which I haven't really talked about this yet, but in between each episode, all the buttons are different, and it's very funny. And some of them are labeled very literally. I should mention some of them are labeled very literally. And case in point, during this episode, the buttons that are labeled are actually called Decocoon and destroy the giant Moth robot, which is kind of funny. But eventually, and of course, Kiva and Jamie argue about which button he should press, while Coop just kind of hits both, and the process does a kind of cool little maneuver where he does a kind of giant phoenix thing, which is very cool. And interestingly enough, it is probably one of the least destructive, one of the most powerful, while also being one of the least destructive weapons in Megas' arsenal, because it destroys all the ringworms while leaving the ringworld left intact. And Kiva's actually pretty impressed, pointing out that she didn't install anything like that. In fact, she knows she didn't, and points out that she's actually pretty impressed about the fact that Coop didn't smash anything. And Jamie even points out that that's actually pretty impressive as well, considering Coop normally smashes things. And of course, Coop points out that he told them that he had it under control, and does ultimately point out that they should learn to put more faith in old Coop. But then in the process, he actually leans up rather smugly against one of the data towers and knocks it over, which causes a giant domino effect that causes the rest of the ring world to kind of collapse. And Coop eventually flies off, but does point out that hopefully the ring world is actually hopefully the ring world is actually all backed up. But but then it actually explodes, which causes Megas to kind of go for a tumble, and Kiva and Jamie kind of go for a tumble as well. And in the process, Kiva finally finds out that Jamie actually lied to her, and he was the one who knocked her out with the bat. And she becomes very pissed and tries to strangle him. But of course Coop then proceeds to kind of remark that that was a very important thing they just blow up, and there's a very good possibility that all of that data will have been lost forever. But ultimately decides rather comically not to dwell on it, and points out that now that that's all dealt with and their training is over, they're just in time for the monster truck marathon that's on this afternoon. And Kiva just kind of point out that that's kind of fine, but also tells him to avoid the minefield on the way back, which Coop apparently forgot was there, and he accidentally winds up blowing himself up again. And then the end credits actually play, where the trio is actually watching the monster truck marathon. But what we find out in the end credits is that one of the ringworms had actually survived the explosion, and it actually somehow followed them home. It's implied to have been one of the ones that was laid inside of Megas, and kind of hitched the ride. It just kind of hitched the ride. But yeah, in case this episode was kind of funny and interesting, and that they just blew up a giant library thing, which of course was indeed a very important thing. And of course Coop even points out that he wasn't good for libraries, and he knew that was eventually going to happen. But And even Jamie and Kiva kind of did an I told you so where they knew Coop was going to blow something up eventually. But, and to be fair, he's had a track record of that where in every episode so far, and I think since without fail, he does indeed blow something up by accident. So, yeah, it's completely in character for him to do something like that. It's kind of a running theme at this point. But more importantly, this episode is just kind of funny, and that's it sets up this idea that we are finally going to learn something about the Glorft, about how their society operates, about what they believe in, about basically anything that would be important for us trying to figure out who we're actually rooting against. And then the episode just kind of doesn't do that because it never got the opportunity to, and I kind of like that. It's very funny, but yeah, it's like this big, and I do like that. I do like when episodes kind of set up this one big thing where it's like, it takes an entire episode to set up a joke and a punchline, and that's basically what this episode is. I mean, it doesn't really, yeah, obviously it's like one of those standalone episodes where it's just like, it's not really connected to anything else, and to be fair, that's Megas XLR in general. There is an overarching story, but for the most part, it's just about Coop and his friends screwing around. For the most part, that's really what the series is. But yeah, this episode does kind of set up the fact that we never really learn anything about the Glorft, and we probably never will, because that turned out to be probably the only place where they were actually going to be able to learn about the Glorft. And of course, now that the ringworld's been destroyed, there's no real point. But yeah, I do kind of like that. It's kind of funny, and I do kind of like how they set that up and then never do anything with it. It's hilarious, and I kind of like it. But in any case, yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, be sure to follow me on Twitter in the description below. Be sure to check out my Patreon in the description below as well. It's only a couple bucks a month. It really helps me out, and you guys get access to a bunch of cool perks that are on my way saying thanks. So be sure to check those out. Link is down in the description. And finally, yeah, just go check out my Patreon. The link is down in the description as well. And also, be sure to check out the videos linked in the end screen as well. Top video is the most recent one. It may or may not be this one. Whereas about me, it was actually the previous one of these I did, Courage Month. So if you actually want to go see those, again, link is down the link is on the end screen. Go check that one out. And yeah, I hope you guys will continue to support Megas Month. But for the time being, thank you guys so much for watching. As the next time, I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.